Denise Ellsbury, and I'm with Linden Oaks Behavioral Health. This month, I have Kevin Stromberg, who is one of the clinicians, therapists at our Linden Oaks Medical Group office in Addison. Kevin works with clients of all ages, but particularly has an interest in working with teens and young people. And so I asked Kevin to be here today to talk with us about cyberbullying, since that is an issue that oftentimes our teens are dealing with. So thank you so much for being here, Kevin.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you do at the Addison office for Linden Oaks Medical Group.
Okay. So I'm actually the lead clinical therapist with Linden Oaks Medical Group Counseling Center, and we do traditional type of outpatient therapy with individuals, families, couples. I typically do individual, and from time to time I will take on a family case as needed.
Okay. And you enjoy working with teens?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great.
A bulk of my caseload is that kind of young, early adolescence, so 10, 11, 12 through early adulthood.
Okay. And I know that there's like certain insurances and things like that, but pretty much anybody could call that office to schedule an appointment if they were interested in doing that.
Yep.
Awesome. So I did ask you here today because I wanted to talk about cyberbullying.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's something that we hear a lot about sometimes for kids, and maybe a thing that parents have a concern about. So let's start at sort of like the ground level, but what is cyberbullying when we hear that term?
So cyberbullying, much like typical bullying, but it occurs on the internet, or it occurs through social media, text messaging. So instead of that typical what we'd see with bullying, where maybe it's a little bit more live action in your face, this is occurring on a lot of our social media devices and whatnot.
And so I know one of the things sometimes with kids is that they tend to use platforms that their parents or adults may not use. And so you mentioned text messaging, but are there other sort of platforms that this happens on besides just like texting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's definitely happening on things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat.
Okay.
Are becoming, and Snapchat is probably utilized a little bit more, as that's gained a lot of popularity with kind of the adolescents compared to Facebook. They kind of joke and say that Facebook is for the adults. It's losing its appeal. And then Twitter I don't hear too much about, mm-hmm. but I know it's being used. And then a lot of it is that Instagram and Snapchat.
Okay. And so bullying often is something that happens not just, one person to the other person, mm-hmm. but involves other groups of people. And so what happens with that in terms of those social media platforms?
Yeah. They can create kind of group messaging. They can do some similar things where even they try to, they can spread rumors pretty quickly through that. So they can, because it's on that social media platform, they tend to have a larger reach, because if they post something, a whole lot of people can see it.
Okay. And then other people get involved mm-hmm. that way as well?
Yeah.
Okay. And like sort of what's the, in terms of prevalence,
mm-hmm.
How often is that happening? Or
yeah, so different kind of studies have reported some different numbers, as low as about 14%, but as high as into the mid-30s, so about 34, 35%, where it's happened. Typically the age range is about 12 to 18, and it's within the past, usually a year of when they kind of do that survey. Mm-hmm. So we've seen as low as 14% and as high as 34%. So it also depends, I think, on people reporting it or feeling comfortable on when they do get approached with a survey to answer it truthfully.
Mm-hmm. And do they kind of define what they mean by bullying? Because I would think sometimes, mm-hmm. Sometimes it might be happening for a young person, but maybe the young person doesn't necessarily understand that is bullying that's happening.
Yeah, and it is defined. I think the hard part, though, is a lot of times people will still say, "Oh, I'm not being bullied. It was just a joke. It was just my friends, being goofy or silly. They didn't mm-hmm. mean it." So they kind of explain it away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so those survey questions are asking within the last year, mm-hmm. have these things happened to you? Gotcha. What are maybe some of the differences in terms of impact from traditional bullying, maybe like adults or parents might understand bullying and how that looked or sounded, impact from that versus impact of cyberbullying?
Yeah, so we see a lot of similar impacts in the sense of we start to have increased complaints of maybe physical health symptoms, stomach aches, not feeling so well, things to kind of remove them from school, for instance. We do see kind of increase in like our depressive symptoms, so that withdrawal, isolation, and avoidance. We may see things where they start to lose interest in previously enjoyed activities, and then we see increase in anxiety-based symptoms, so a lot of worrying, and again, that avoidance piece. One of the big things, though, that we see that's probably a little bit different is there may be an increase or even a decrease in engagement on their tech devices. So sometimes that changes, but you can't say for certainty they're going to be on it more or less. We kind of see a little bit of both, where they may be responding to a lot of things, so they may be on it more, or all of a sudden they're just
don't want to have anything to do with it.
Like completely disgusted with it all of a sudden.
And maybe for a period of time it's one way, and then all of a sudden going completely the opposite direction to wanting to engage in it all the time or something.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How about, I don't know if there's any studies or if you just are aware of it in terms of kind of like long-term impact from cyberbullying, or do we know because it's kind of a recent phenomenon?
Yeah, so I'm not too certain what the research currently says about long-term impacts, but since cell phones and whatnot and being on computer messaging boards, things like that, there's been an avenue for this, so I think we'll probably see, or at least to my understanding, I wouldn't think the long-term impact is probably going to match traditional bullying, but we're probably going to see an increase in cyberbullying because it's easier to do.
Well, and we certainly see that even with adults, right? Like it happens in the adult world as well, maybe a little more anonymously, but if anybody who looks on Twitter, you can see lots of posts that are kind of bullying kinds of messages. So ongoing impact in terms of self-esteem issues, feeling confident about life in general.
Yeah, so we'll see those decreases in that self-esteem, decreases in self-confidence, just due to what could be posted, what's being said, because it's not just limited to words, it could be images and things like that. Meme culture is really popular, so people are turning people into memes, and that's, again, that's still bullying, but depending on how people are perceiving it, they may just, again, look at it and go, oh, people are just having fun.
Interesting. So like I think maybe as adults tend to think of that the words are being hurtful, and isn't one of the things more about like Snapchat, Instagram, is that it tends to be more visually based, and the things that people can do with the graphics to hurt someone's feelings or bully them. See, I wouldn't have thought of that piece. So great. So we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I'd like to maybe switch it a little bit more to like thinking about like what can parents do and how could parents notice if maybe their teen was being cyberbullied.
Okay.
Right. So join us after the break to focus a little bit more on what parents can do.
I love taking care of my mom. It wasn't easy at first. She learned how to better communicate her needs.
And you learned how to not ignore yours.
I discovered how to make healthier meals.
And I discovered how much I enjoyed them.
Becoming a caregiver is a learning experience for everyone. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Mommy.
Llama al 1-888-971-2013 y obtén información para cuidar mejor a quien cuidó de ti.
Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. My name is Denise Ellsbury, and we've been talking with Kevin Stromberg about cyberbullying, just kind of understanding a little bit more about it. But when we left off, we were really kind of getting into, okay, now we understand it. What should parents be noticing, or how could parents notice maybe if their teen, if their young person was maybe experiencing some cyberbullying?
Yeah, I think sometimes the hard part is catching it, because it's very hard to notice because it is happening on those devices. So a lot of times it's kind of that open conversation and kind of staying calm and being kind of respectful of the child's space while allowing them the opportunity to maybe disclose it. Because even with traditional bullying, if it's not noticed, it might not be disclosed because we fear retribution or retaliation from the bully or bullies. So it can be pretty difficult for parents to notice. So hopefully they have kind of an open conversation with their children already, so that way if they started to, they can, share that.
Sure. Well, and I would think sometimes, like you were saying earlier, the young person themselves may not understand this as bullying, and so if a parent asks, like, is somebody picking on you? Well, no, right? Because so how can parents maybe, like, what are there certain terms or ways that parents can talk about it that might help the young person recognize that this is a problem and it's not okay for that to be happening?
Yeah, I think what can be really helpful is for parents first and foremost to understand the social media platforms a little bit more. Doesn't necessarily mean signing up for them, but at least having some working knowledge of what they are and how they kind of operate, as well as if, for instance, the child doesn't want to talk with the parent, can the parent, have a relative or somebody else kind of have that conversation with them? And I think it's using those terminologies, that if someone's teasing you, it's okay to tell me, we can kind of deal with it from there. So, using that type of verbiage and letting them know that, that you validate them and that you really understand that what they're going through can be difficult.
So you'd mentioned earlier that sometimes the things that parents might actually notice or see would be some changes in how their child is acting in other ways. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we may see two things, again, like in regards to school. Is all of a sudden are their grades kind of unexplainably dropping, or are they starting to get more reports maybe from the school that the child seems less engaged in the classroom? And then as well as, are we noticing maybe an increase in physical symptoms, so that way, they can stay home? Because although the bullying is happening in this online platform, a lot of times you still have to physically see a lot of these people who may be involved in the bullying. So we may see that kind of avoidance of the school or work, or where it may, kind of center, where those people may kind of be localized. And then as well as, you may just start to notice those behavioral type of changes, like I was saying, in regards to those potential depressive or anxiety-based symptoms. So that avoidance, lack of engagement, just kind of that lethargic kind of approach or appearance.
So, like, I don't really want to do anything anymore. I'd rather stay home, or from school or activities or things like that.
Yeah, suddenly quitting a sports team or extracurricular, for instance. Things that kind of are outside of the norm of what your child has typically already been doing. But you may also notice if they're on their devices, are they kind of, feverishly responding to something with a little bit more frequency or regularity? If a parent walks by, if they quickly go to hide their screens, for instance, they don't want someone to see, or if another adult walks by and they're hiding their screens, yes, there's that element of privacy, but does it seem kind of out of character?
Like, is there a real sort of secretive nature to their use of their devices or whatever? One of the things in the youth mental health first aid program that we always are talking about is the areas that we notice changes in behavior are things like impact on school or work or just daily activities. Do I not care so much about my appearance where that was important to me before? And am I sleeping more, sleeping less, eating more, eating less, right? And my relationships with other people. Those are the areas where a parent would notice changes in a young person. And I was thinking as you were talking too about their use of their devices is probably some strong emotion that's connected to the time frame that they're using the device, right? So if all of a sudden somebody gets really upset, that might be something parents could notice.
Yeah, if they're, getting really upset or, tossing the device, things like that, that again, just seem a little out of place, out of character for that interaction. It's tough because, we walk around with our cell phones pretty much all the time, and the majority of us have smartphones, so that does lead again to that easier access, but it's kind of noticing those changes, and some things may be a little bit more subtle, and that's where that conversation piece comes in of, hey, is everything okay? How's everything going? I've kind of noticed that you seem to be really intent on what's happening on your phone, right? And trying not to then turn that into a punishment, but really that supportive communication piece. Because a lot of times I think that's what the kids' fear is, if I say something, I'm going to get my device taken away.
And that would be the worst, that would be the worst thing, probably, yeah. So while you were talking about, having those conversations, I'm sure parents say to you, well, yeah, okay, I noticed this, but I don't know how to start that conversation. I don't know how to bring up the subject with my son, with my daughter. So you phrased it in a certain way there. You said, like, I've noticed this, right? Are there other kinds of ways that you help parents know how to have those conversations?
Yeah, and again, it comes a lot with that validation piece, and not just going, hey, are you being cyberbullied? Because most people are going to be taken aback and go, no.
Right.
Now, sometimes they may say yes, and again, they might not feel comfortable with that particular parent. So if the parent is saying, hey, I've noticed this, can they maybe also say, do you maybe feel comfortable talking with someone else, another family member, a teacher, therapist, for instance? Are they open to those other people, so that way the information can be found out, so that way the parent can, help.
Sure. Yeah, that sometimes parents have to say, okay, sure, I would like if my child would talk to me, but it's more important that they have somebody that I trust that they're talking to. It doesn't just have to be me.
Right.
Yeah. So again, that phraseology of like, hey, I noticed this, or I've noticed that, how's it going? Just starting what might feel like an awkward conversation.
Right.
Yeah. I heard somebody say just recently, I think sometimes as parents, the mistake is to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and have this big conversation with my kid, and then I can say, okay, job done, right? And really it should be about a lot of smaller conversations about technology or how people are using that. As parents continue to have conversations with their teens, any other tips that you would have for parents about those conversations?
Yeah, and when it's with the conversation, talking, understanding that they have their privacy, but also asking to be able to see what's happening with that. Can I see what you're doing on your phone? Can I see what's happening on your social media? Sometimes we may go and encourage the parent or another trusted family member to try to follow or be friended on their social media, which I understand for a lot of kids is frightening, but it's kind of an extra protective factor that's on there, because a lot of times things may get screen grabbed or whatever, and that's how it gets shown sometimes to other people. So by the parents at least having access to it, or a trusted family member having access.
Okay, so that's probably a loaded conversation between parent and kid, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, but we're going to take another break. So join us after this next break, and we'll talk a little bit more again about what parents can do.
Their support changed my life.
They were like family.
My voice is now heard. A home for every animal.
My future is bright because they cared.
This is our home now.
Thank you to the 1,200 nonprofits that serve Cass and Clay counties every day.
Mommy.
Yeehaw!
Llama al 1-888-971-2013 y obtén información para cuidar mejor a quien cuidó de ti.
Welcome back to Mental Health First Aid. We've been talking with Kevin Stromberg from Linden Oaks Medical Group about cyberbullying, and we were in that last section really talking about, you know, what parents can notice and a little bit about what parents can do. So you work with teens in the office. How often, in terms of counseling with your teen clients, does this topic or this concern about cyberbullying come up?
It comes up pretty frequently. It usually doesn't come up in the first couple appointments. It usually kind of comes after, you know, they get a little bit more trust and they realize that, you know, I am their support person and I'm here to help them. Because a lot of times they come in with the anxiety or depressive type of symptoms, and then, like I said, after they build that trust with myself, then it might start coming up, or they may start asking questions of like, hey, someone sent me this on Snapchat, or I sent this snap and, you know, someone screenshot it and I know who did it, but I don't know where it went. What can I do or what should I do? Okay, so they might toss out like a situational kind of thing and what should I do about this kind of thing. So how do you have, in the therapy context or the treatment context, how do you have conversations with kids about cyberbullying? Yeah, once we kind of figure out maybe what's going on, the big thing I try to do is provide education first. Let the child know kind of this is what it sounds like to me, and then still respecting their autonomy and going, what do you think about that? You know, I just went over all this stuff about cyberbullying. Do you think I'm in the ballpark with that? And then it is really just trying to support them and help them understand, one, that it is cyberbullying, even if they might not fully agree, and let them have that conversation with myself. And then we start trying to talk about the ways that we can go about handling the cyberbullying. Okay, so when you're in that kind of educational piece of it, what reaction do you often get from kids? Is it like, no, I don't think that's what it is, or does it kind of take them maybe some time to kind of, oh, that is what's going on here? Initially, it's kind of resistant of like, no, that's not right, and then maybe after another appointment or two, they kind of sit and go, okay, maybe I think that is what's going on, but it's only this one instance. And sometimes it is only that one instance, and sometimes it's a lot more than that. So they have their own sort of awareness building process of what's happening. Yeah. Yeah. So as you move into what do you want to do, what kind of conversations do you have with them about that? Yeah, so I definitely talk to them about, you know, trying to let a parent know, you know, sometimes it's which parent do you feel more comfortable, or which parent do you believe won't start yelling at you? And a lot of times I offer them to use the therapy space to have their parent come in so we can talk about it, and then we can try to, you know, problem solve it. So if they don't feel comfortable having that conversation at home, let's do it in the therapy office. If they don't feel comfortable having it at home, is there a teacher, school counselor, dean of students, assistant principal who maybe they feel comfortable with in the school setting, that they can have that conversation, which then can maybe kind of continue to bridge that gap so that way we can get the parents involved. Because ultimately that you'd like to be able to get the parents involved. Yeah. And so how do you bring that topic up with parents then, if you've invited them into the session there? Yeah, so usually what I try to do is I have the teen or child start the conversation. If not, then I'll gladly go ahead and go, so, you know, we've been talking for a little bit, and one of the concerns they brought up is things about bullying, and particularly cyberbullying, and then ask the parents if they have any questions about cyberbullying in general. Do they understand cyberbullying? before we jump into maybe exactly what happened, because I think a lot of times it's, oh, they're being bullied. Well, what happened? Who did it? Let me know so we can go.
I'm going to go to the school and tell them.
Yeah, there's a lot of anger involved, which makes sense. But the child often fears that then the parent's angry at them. So we try to slow and manage that anger a little bit before we get to the who, what, when, where, why.
And really have parents approach it from what's going to be helpful to your child, not how do you emotionally want to respond to this. So when you get to the what are we going to do? What are conversations that you have with kids? What are conversations that you have with parents about that?
Yeah, so the conversations tend to be pretty similar about things like trying, depending on how it's happening, can we block the bully or bullies, for instance? Can we block them on social media? A lot of times with our cell phones, we can block certain numbers. So can we block that number, for instance? It's the internet, so things kind of are forever. So you can, save the stuff. And that way, if you need to report it to a school official, for instance, or if it's something where maybe there are some threats to someone's safety being made, then we may need to report that to the police. But usually we talk about blocking access to the bullies, and then keeping the material saved in case we do need to report it.
Okay. And how do kids typically respond to how about blocking this person?
There's a lot of back and forth about that because it's their friend or it's a friend of a friend, and the more friends you have, the more likely you are to get things like likes and comments on things, so they can be pretty apprehensive to that at first. But I try to frame it as, what would you be doing if this person was doing this to you face to face? Would you keep talking to them, or would you walk away? Would you stop being their friend? And when you start to phrase it a little bit more like that, they start to be a little bit more willing to block.
And to kind of realize that's a control that they have. That's something that they can do, not just be passive in that situation. How about with parents? What kinds of, and I think earlier you were talking about that sometimes finding ways for parents to have access to certain parts. So how does that conversation go?
When that conversation with child and parent, child's usually kind of very resistant to that, of where either the parent has passwords and things like access to passwords, or just a lot of times it's allowing them to just be able to view what's on there. So that's a conversation that takes a lot of work, and then it's, again, having that parent be in the supportive role and letting them understand that, they're letting you into their world and this is going to be pretty scary for them. So they're going to be apprehensive and they might not want to do this. So we don't want to yell at them. We don't want to take things away. We want to support. That's the big thing. Is I sound like a broken record in sessions a lot of times, because I'll say we got to support. We need to support.
Okay. So that it's not, a reactive response on the part of the parent, but thinking about what's going to be helpful to their child in that moment. What about taking, I'm sure sometimes parents want to be like, okay, well fine, I'm just taking the phone away and this is causing you so much stress, I'm just going to take the phone away.
We try to encourage against taking the phone away, because that's kind of their lifeline, and they're being punished now for being bullied, so the kids are going to think, I'm being punished for reporting this. So why am I going to bother to tell people if I'm going to be punished?
So a lot of kind of things for parents to be mindful of, and again, having conversations early with kids about social media and how to use that well. Well, thank you so much for being here, Kevin. I really appreciate you taking the time to be our guest to talk about cyberbullying and understanding that a little bit more. Thank you for being with us on Mental Health First Aid, and until next month, be well.